Welcome everybody to GoLocal Live. I'm Josh Fenton, CEO and co-founder. First and foremost, want to thank Josh Short from the Wilbury Theater. Joined us earlier to kind of kick off the anticipation of 401 Gives, the big fundraising effort for Rhode Island's nonprofits. That's going to be on April 1st. Last year it raised more than $2 million. The goal is much higher this year, so I hope everybody participates in that. That's the good news. Let's go down to the University of Virginia. The chair of the political science department, Jennifer Lawless. Professor, not a lot of good news around the country and around the world right today.
Not a lot of good news at all. It doesn't matter where you look, it's generally bad.
Let's start today's numbers, 7.9% inflation rate, highest in 40 years, cropping up, functionally 8%. Are we going to see double-digit inflation this summer?
The Biden administration hopes not. I don't know. I mean, we were told when it hit 5 and 6% that there was a decent chance that that would be the peak and it would be coming down. We're now at 8%, so that's substantially greater than where we were. They don't know. Economists don't know. A lot of it will depend on supply chain issues. A lot of it will depend on what happens with this war. We have a global economy, and so it's not just decisions that we make. I will say that, this news is terrible for the administration because at the same time, unemployment is back to pre-pandemic levels, and it's the best that it's been in a very long time. But it's difficult for them to be able to claim credit on that front when, even though more people are working, they can't afford to buy anything.
Yeah, it's a very, very dynamic situation. I was looking at one chart. It looks like it's the highest level since looks like the end of the Carter administration. On one of the graphs I was looking at, by the way, that was at 14%. And in the first 2 years of Reagan, he had a tough battle with inflation. It was around the double digits for much of the first 2 years of his administration. It's been an interesting dynamic on gas prices. His decision to cut off Russian petroleum, I think for the most part across the country, has been pretty strongly supported. People are seeing the images, women and children literally being blown up on the streets. I think that has hit everyone in the United States. So does he catch a little bit of a political break on the implications of gas prices continuing to rise and the other supply chain factors of when energy costs increase, how that affects shipping and cost of goods?
I think so. And part of it is because the American people are just not aware of the fact that only a very small percentage of our oil and a very small amount of this inflation is being caused by what's going on in Russia and Ukraine. But yeah, I think he gets a little bit of a pass for some of it. The other thing that I would note that makes this different than the Carter-Reagan years with inflation is the economy was really characterized by stagflation. So you had stagnant wages, stagnant unemployment, and inflation. Here, at least on the unemployment side and on the wages side, we're seeing increases. So people aren't feeling the effects as dramatically as they had been 40 years ago. It's not to say that there's no problem, though.
Yeah, I mean, I think it started under Ford where you saw the high levels of inflation, also high unemployment, also high interest rates. It was called the misery index during that sort of 5, 6, 7 year period in which consumers couldn't get any help anywhere. Let's go to the Ukraine. The Vice President Harris was in Poland this morning, afternoon time in Poland, but this morning giving a speech reaffirming NATO's and the United States' commitment to protecting every inch of NATO land. What was that about? And was that about reaffirming and making sure NATO countries felt comfortable? Because I can't imagine that Vladimir Putin, who's rocketing towards elderly people, could really care less what the vice president has to say.
Well, I think it's three things. First, I think he probably does care what the vice president has to say because she's there delivering the message of the president. So this was not Kamala Harris going rogue. This was a clearly orchestrated decision by the White House to send the second highest ranked person in the country to go deliver that message. Second, yes, exactly. It's to allay the concerns of the NATO nations. There's no question that the United States will continue to fight with them. And I think it also, third, sends a signal that NATO doesn't have to move faster than it's comfortable moving. The United States is willing to do that without them as long as they endorse our plans. And so they don't have to give up all of their Russian oil, for example. They don't have to give up any kind of Russian energy if it would make it more difficult for their people. And so I think that the speech was meant to, convey all of those messages. Finally, I'd note that the speech is not really about Ukraine. It's about what happens after Ukraine. If Vladimir Putin is able to take Ukraine, what does that mean for the Baltic republics? What does that mean for other former Soviet territories? And what does that mean for those that don't have uncontested land and actually are, protected by NATO? And I think that this is the goal of the speech, was to make all of that very clear.
Poland has taken in 1 million plus refugees. I mean, one of the greatest demonstrations of kindness from one nation to another. Does that begin to, the cost for the Poles is going to become substantial as time goes by? They literally are housing them in everyone's homes and apartments and dormitories. I mean, it's really a remarkable act of kindness. Does more pressure get put on the United States to A, give more support to Poland, and B, start to take in some of the refugees that Europe as a whole doesn't have to take them? Some can come to America.
Certainly. And I think we're going to begin to see the sorting out of refugees and where they might wind up. Poland obviously is a border nation, and it's the easiest way for those under attack to have gotten out. I don't think that this is a long-term plan. The other piece of this that's important to keep in mind here is that it's unclear when the end date is. I mean, at this point, yes, there are certain cities and areas of Ukraine that have been completely demolished, and there's no way that people can return to those areas and neighborhoods. There are other places where that's not the case, and if there's some sort of end game soon, many of them can return. So I think the total number of refugees and the length of time that they're going to need support is still an unknown.
The president of Ukraine has become, in many countries, in many democratic countries, a global superstar. I mean, a real beacon of what democracy is about. How long can he keep this up? How long can he keep pushing European nations and the United States forward? And at what point, he's on the verge of almost begging and pleading. He's begged for air support, which has been rejected. He begged for aircraft, which seems to be still in some deal-making, complicated deal-making, but has functionally been rejected. The U.S. is not going to provide F-16s to Poland, and Poland's not able to deliver MiGs that they have directly to the Ukraine. What's the breaking point for the United States has to really take into account this brinksmanship?
Well, I think they are taking it into account, and they're weighing the pros and cons and what every request that Zelensky's making would likely lead to. And at this point, if the likely implication is nuclear war initiated by Russia, they're going to deny that request. I think part of this is also going to have to do with, and when the United States and the rest of Europe will, cave and have to do some more than what they're already doing. It depends on how long it seems that the Russian forces are going to be able to advance. I mean, based on the accounts that we see, they're not doing well. They're not accomplishing what they need to accomplish in the time frame that they need to accomplish it, which means that as it's becoming increasingly difficult for them to access money, other resources, and personnel to advance this war, Zelensky manages to fight another day. So, all of these pieces are moving at the same time. And the Russians were dealt a big blow when China said that they're not going to provide aircraft parts. So, China might not be on our side with this, but it doesn't seem like they're actively helping the Russians either.
There's been a lot of high-profile moves. McDonald's closed down over 800 stores in Russia. That may help their overall health more than anything else. Secondly, the French seized a oligarch super yacht. The British government announced today that they were functionally seizing the Chelsea Football Club from another oligarch. These things are fine, and they capture a headline, but do they really impair the fighting factor of the Russian army and help save Ukrainian lives?
McDonald's does, and Starbucks does, and all of these companies that on a daily basis are not going to be operating, I think do, because it's very difficult for the Russian people to get any information about what's going on. But now they're going outside, and there's no McDonald's anymore. There's no Starbucks. These buildings just don't have anybody working in them. There's nobody going to be working in them. They can't use their MasterCards and Visas the way that they had been. As it becomes increasingly clear that something is going on and the information that the Russian people are getting is not what's actually happening, I think that's when you begin to see, a real push from inside Russia. We're also beginning to see at least one oligarch has denounced his Russian citizenship, an Israeli-Russian oligarch. Others have basically said, take everything, I'm on the side of Ukraine, I want to fight against the Russian government. So if all of these pieces fall at roughly the same time, I think that that's powerful. The problem, of course, is it's unclear what comes next. Like if somehow Putin was toppled, and again, he's so careful about who he surrounds himself with, I'm not exactly sure what that would even look like, who replaces him. But that's a different situation. That's a different question than what happens when he can no longer advance this war because he doesn't have the personnel or the supplies.
Professor, they've got to be developing 1,000 different potential scenarios as to what takes place. From a governing the country, is this, we've got some complicated factors coming out of the pandemic. How much of the administration, the White House's time, is being put towards avoiding a nuclear holocaust? That's category one. And category two, rebuilding the American economy and advancing it. Obviously, surrender on Build Back Better has now finally been declared. I haven't looked to see if Gina Raimondo still tweeted again today for Build Back Better. That was a daily thing even after it was dead. But how does this White House balance two monumental challenges simultaneously?
Well, they have to walk and chew gum at the same time, and the government is big enough for them to be able to do it. The reality is that the national security forces and national security experts that are briefing the president multiple times a day are not the people that are helping the Department of Transportation fill potholes and create jobs to rebuild our bridges. So a lot of people might complain about the size of U.S. government, but the upside is that at least for projects that are already underway and for plans that have already unfolded, they can be accomplished simultaneously. So I don't think that this means that the president and the administration in general can't focus on domestic policy issues. I do think that it means that the American people are probably going to be recalibrating, at least temporarily, how important certain cost-cutting measures and promises that had been made to them are.
I'm going to beg to differ with you. You've not driven the roads. You're down in Virginia, beautiful highways and roadways. There are no potholes filled in the state of Rhode Island. So I question whether or not the US DOT and Secretary Buttigieg has Rhode Island on its checklist to be able to fill those potholes, because they are immense right now. In all seriousness, Congress has played and Republicans have played nice on the Ukraine. They haven't, for the most part, not saying every single Republican across the country, but from a leadership standpoint, they participated in the nation's strategy on this. Does that continue?
Well, first, I want to note how low a bar it is. Like, should we really be celebrating the fact that Republicans think that bombing maternity and children's cancer units is beyond the pale? I mean, that's where we've gotten, and we still don't have unanimous support, and it took Kevin McCarthy several days before he actually distanced himself from Trump's comments about Putin. So, yes, they've been playing nice, but if this isn't the time to play nice, then I don't think there ever will be. I'm not sure we can generalize beyond this atrocity to, sort of normal governing. And we're seeing, at least in terms of conversations regarding the Supreme Court nomination, that Republicans already have a series of tactics up their sleeves that they hope to employ.
Yeah, I mean, Supreme Court aside, though, I just want to revert back on the Ukraine. Leaders have put their members in line to vote for these major initiatives to date, correct?
Yeah, but I mean, again, like if you can't get bipartisan support, given what's going on right now, it's hard to imagine how this democracy stays in one piece. Well,
we couldn't get in line on things like attack on the Capitol, so as you say, the bar is rather low. Let's go over to the Supreme Court. That's obviously, a couple weeks ago, the announcement was made. It was big news over a weekend, and then since then, Ukraine has sucked the oxygen out of the governmental debate. Isn't that potentially good news from just a pure political standpoint, the Democrats have the votes. They just need to get hearings done and a vote taking place, correct?
The Democrats have the votes and they need to get the hearings done, but what that means is that the nomination has to emerge from the Judiciary Committee. And there, if Republicans decide that they're going to make the Democrats' lives miserable, this could take a very long time. The upside to dealing with these foreign policy crises that really do require a unified government and one message is that, the members of Congress, the members of the Senate in particular, really don't have time, I think, to engage in the kind of tactics that would allow for that nomination to be held up. We're also seeing several Republicans indicate that they're going to vote for the nominee. Susan Collins, if to the extent that you can trust her, has already indicated that she found her very impressive. So, I think that there probably will be some degree of bipartisan support for this, but there doesn't need to be.
What's your count on the number of Republicans?
Who will ultimately vote yes?
Yes.
No more than 5.
No more than 5. As the election season emerges in Rhode Island, we have some big races. They don't seem to be developing per se, in part because of sort of the I don't want to say we're out of the pandemic, but the emergence out of the pandemic, and people don't really care and they want to go out to dinner and go see a Providence College basketball game or whatever it might be. And then coupled with the Ukraine has really captured the heart of both of people across the spectrum. I mean, I am amazed. We obviously get a lot of comments. We get hundreds of thousands of comments on Facebook on a monthly basis. And you know the frequent flyers, the hard right-wingers and the hard left-wingers, and you see that there's really a consensus, certainly in Rhode Island, of the most polarized opinions in support of the Ukraine. Does this sort of, this is going to last for months. Is this going to shorten the political season down to just weeks?
I don't think so. I think basically what it does is it takes foreign policy off the table for differentiating yourself from your opponents on the campaign trail. That's not necessarily a bad thing for a congressional race, just because most voters, when it comes to voting for members of Congress, don't care that much about foreign policy. When they care about it, it's when they're voting for the President of the United States. I do think that it probably changes the tone of the campaign at least a little bit. It's hard to have upbeat rallies and fun events when you go home and you turn on the news or you look at your phone and you're watching horrible imagery of basically genocide. And so the tone of the campaign might be different, but I don't think that we're going to see a really shortened campaign season.
Are we going to continue to see the level of media coverage? I mean, right now, CNN is all about it. Other networks have significant resources in country, adjacent on borderlines, et cetera. But we all know that the media has a tendency to get bored with things. If they see a little dip in the 8 o'clock hour, they're pivoting over to some salacious missing person in Alabama. Are we going to see a commitment? We've seen this before. Haiti, and CNN's all about Haiti after a tragedy, and then they're gone 6 days later. Are we going to see a commitment from the media to continue to cover this, or will those who are interested here in the United States have to shift over to, the Kyiv Independent, which we run the feed for, or the BBC in order to see continuous coverage?
Well, it's a symbiotic relationship. If people are continuing to watch the coverage, the networks are going to continue to provide it. They're a profit-making business, and the bottom line counts. That said, I think it's likely that we're going to segue, and the primetime hours on CNN, for example, are not going to be all Ukraine all the time. But it's hard to imagine that it's not going to be some Ukraine a lot of the time, at least for the foreseeable future. One thing that's particularly likely to happen is the coverage will continue as long as there are compelling visuals and people that are able to talk to these reporters. Every day, even if the story is generally the same, you're getting new firsthand accounts, and you're seeing this devastation and tragedy firsthand. And people will continue to watch that as long as it seems new. Once the stories are all the same, or once you're really only seeing reporters covering it and they're not talking to people on the ground, it becomes more difficult to attract viewers.
As we look forward over the next week, what do you see as the dynamic issues and what should we be looking for?
I mean, I think it's mostly going to be this war. And if next week at this time we're still in the same position as we are right now, I think at that point it really becomes uncertain when the end is. If Putin is not able to take Ukraine in what will then amount to almost 3 weeks, it's hard to see how he has the ability to press on beyond Ukraine. But if he hasn't retreated, it's also hard to see how we get him out of there. And we just wait for resources to be fully depleted. And that's just a horrible situation for the people of Ukraine to be in. But it's also a really precarious situation for the global community. So I'd be watching over the course of the next week to see if China continues to take steps that indicate that they're not going to be aiding and abetting this, if other nations who haven't been outspoken critics become a little bit more vocal.
Yeah, I mean, all Russian troops are now in Ukraine. The nearly 200,000 that were staged outside the borders are now in the country fighting. That's extended their supply lines, exhausted them, fuel issues, morale issues, et cetera, et cetera. On the flip side, the Ukrainians get more armaments from other countries. They're getting more missiles, et cetera, et cetera. And their frontline troops are getting more experienced and more hardened. So there doesn't seem to be, even if a city or two falls, it does not seem like the Ukrainians, they're going to fight no matter what, as long as this thing takes.
I think that's right, but I also think that that is barring no crazy tactic on the part of Vladimir Putin. And so he has demonstrated that his behavior is not predictable. So, I mean, yeah, if I were making bets based on a rational actor, I would agree totally. I don't know that we are, though.
As always, thank you so much. I wish we had better news to share across. If you're not watching this, I'm sure you're watching Providence College. They're playing today their first round of the Big East, their first game in the Big East. They had a bye yesterday, and everybody in Rhode Island will be tracking that as well. Stay safe, everybody. If you haven't gotten a booster shot, please do so. Keep everybody healthy. More than 1,000 people are dying in the United States every single day from COVID. This is not completely over by any measure. Thanks, everybody. Stay safe.